we are live. I hope this time I can be heard. I'm pretty sure I can be. I double checked. For those who don't know, last night I went to do a stream talking about geopolitics, talking about Trump's call with Putin and other things. And I was about 10 minutes into my rantings when someone in the chat said they couldn't hear anything I was saying. And it turns out that the system had the wrong audio driver selected from my microphone and it completely screwed everything up. But I was going to redo that tonight, that topic tonight, and I'm going to have to wait because we got the fantastic news today that the Kent County Prosecutor, Chris Becker, is not going to retry Christopher Schurr for murder, which this is a story we've covered in some depth on this program. And in fact, we actually have done all we can to encourage the prosecutor not to bring these charges once again. And now we got the official story today that Officer Schurr is a free man for good. Unless Dana Nessel charges him too. But I don't think she's going to. She didn't take the case in the first place. She had that opportunity. She didn't want that kind of glory. So even though it is still technically possible, Dana Nessel could charge Christopher Schurr, yet that just does not seem likely. And what we'll do tonight, we'll look at the live news conferences. We have a news conference from Chris Becker, the prosecutor. We have a news conference from Christopher Schurr's defense team. But first, we have this story here. This just came out today also from Wood TV. One holdout kept the former officer from being acquitted. So we heard about this in the post-trial news conferences, but now we have a story about this. One member of the jury that couldn't reach a verdict in the Christopher Schurr murder trial said race never came up in the deliberations, that Schurr helped himself by taking a stand, and that there was one main holdout that kept the former officer from being acquitted. That holdout, he told Target 8 in exchange of emails, was the jury foreperson, the only black jury member on the 12-person jury. Schurr's defense team confirmed it. The jury could not reach a verdict after 4 days and 21 hours of deliberations, leading to a mistrial. Prosecutor Chris Becker on Thursday today announced he would not retry the case that has divided the community. Becker has said the jury voted 10-2 in favor of acquittal. The defense attorney said it was 11-1. Well, same difference, I suppose. But in exchange of emails with Target 8, a member of the jury wrote that the foreperson, quote, claimed there was no way that they, I know I'm using they in the plural for a single person, could see Schurr actually fearing for his life as he and Patrik Lyoya struggled for the officer's taser. So in other words, the guy went into the trial determined to convict the police officer and completely ignored all of the defense's testimony. That is what this says. That is what the juror is in effect saying. He was an unreasonable juror. He was a lynching juror. Schurr, who is white, encountered Lyoya, who is black and was blacked out drunk during a traffic stop in April 2022. The juror, one of 3 men on the jury, said it wouldn't have made sense to retry Schurr, as they're going to have a real tough time finding 12 people who would unanimously vote guilty in Kent County based on majority demographics alone. Oh, you mean you're not going to find 12 black people who are also going to be lynchers? That's what that means, effectively. That's what this juror is saying. Which, unfortunately, I mean, assuming the juror isn't lying, and why would he be? That the only, because this is in the news story now, the one black juror says it wasn't me who supported the conviction. You know, there'd be some contest about this, but no. The fact is that the one juror who happens to be black just could not find it in his heart to acquit the police officer fighting for his life against a violent, first fleeing, then fighting suspect who had now seized control of his taser. The 12-member jury is made up of 9 women and 3 men. 10 were white, 1 Hispanic, and 1, the foreperson, was black. It's weird because some statistics, Hispanics are counted as white people. Isn't that weird? The jury who spoke to Target 8 didn't want to be identified. Can't imagine why. He would like to avoid having that kind of exposure. The jury deliberated, blah, blah, blah. We didn't even, okay, this is actually important, that we didn't even really discuss manslaughter much because of the fact that we couldn't agree on the primary charge. So what happened was they went through the entire trial with Christopher Schurr being charged with second-degree murder. And then at the very, very end, the prosecutor goes, oh, you know what? Let's actually throw in this lesser included charge of manslaughter, which is crazy because the difference between second-degree murder and manslaughter is that manslaughter have been like a kind of a like voluntary manslaughter, not involuntary manslaughter. So a kind of heat of passion thing, which there have been absolutely no testimony whatsoever to support. And it's really a shameful decision of the judge, who's, by the way, every decision the judge made in this case was shameful. She was a lynching judge. To allow that, because she allowed the defense to present their entire case and then present no evidence, no testimony, no arguments on why the jury should also not find him guilty of manslaughter. Outrageous. But fortunately, the jury was smarter than the judge and said that we didn't even discuss manslaughter because we couldn't even agree on the primary charge. So we never got to manslaughter because we couldn't agree on murder. Either way led the judge to declare mistrial. Target 8 tried talking to other members. Some couldn't be reached. Some declined. Others did not respond. The death led to marches and protests and visits by civil rights grifters, including Al Sharpton. But the juror said race was not part of the deliberations. For what it's worth, even with a diverse jury, the white-black narrative was never something that was even considered in our conversations. Well, of course it wasn't. You're not supposed to say that out loud. That's the quiet part. You're supposed to go in with your preconceived notions and vote according to what you've been led to believe by the media. That's how that's supposed to work, right? You're not supposed to say out loud, we're gonna convict this guy because he's a white cop and it's a black victim, right? I'm sorry, not victim, assailant. No, you don't say those things. You don't say that stuff out loud. It was more about the training and policies than potential political tension, the juror claimed. 3 members of the Grand Rapids Police Department, including 2 captains, testified that Schurr followed his training and department policies, to which the prosecution countered with some completely fictional concept of quote-unquote standard police practices, a thing that does not exist, except in the mind of their so-called experts. The juror also wrote that the testimony of Schurr helped sway some. Well, I'm glad the defense made the right decision there. I do believe, based on being all around all the other jurors and with discussion with them throughout the trial, that Chris taking the stand provided clarity for some of those that remained on the fence about their vote, he wrote. Schurr testified that he feared for his life as he and Lyoya fought over his taser. Yeah, do you think as you're fighting a violently resisting suspect for control of a potentially deadly weapon in his hands that you might fear for your life? Just maybe. Just maybe. So anyway, for those who just tuning in, hey Mark, good to see you. He is more or less free and clear. Christopher Schurr is now, although there is still the possibility of Dana Nessel bringing charges against him, but I don't think that's likely because she didn't the first time around, and she can see the results the same way this prosecutor can also. Theoretically, he could also be charged federally. I think that's also extremely unlikely because the only way that would be is if they claimed there was some kind of racial motivation in the shooting, and there was no evidence whatsoever that brought that to bear. So probably no chance of a federal trial whatsoever. Very, very unlikely Dana Nessel will bring charges. Officer Schurr is basically a free man. He still has a civil lawsuit against him, outrageously. But at the end of the day, you know, in the very worst case, he gets a judgment against him. But, you know, there's only so much a court can take from you. They can't take your house away from you. He just doesn't have a lot of money, so it's not going to do them any good. It's just they're trying to score the political grift points is all that's going to be about. Anyway, so we have a news conference from the evil ogre, racist, cop-hating prosecutor Chris Becker, and let's tune in and see what he had to say. This was earlier today.
Seek a retrial case. I've made the decision not to seek a retrial in the case of Christopher Schurr. You have a handout there, but I know this is an extremely difficult decision. And I spoke with Peter about a half hour ago. Obviously, he is very disappointed in that decision. I know there's many members of the community that are disappointed in that decision. They did not arrive at it lightly. I looked at everything. I looked at our case. I looked at the defense case. I looked at the arguments.
He doesn't say anything about the members of the community that are happy about that decision. This guy was on the side of the race grifters from day one. Anyway.
That were made. I looked at the jury selection process because I think that's probably one of the biggest things that going into this, we were thinking about, getting a good jury. I even went over and watched more of the trial. I reviewed the trial because sometimes you're in the moment, you miss things. So I would try to review the trial. So I took everything into account when I made this decision. And basically what it boils down to is I don't think we reach a different verdict if I do a retrial in this case. The jury came back deadlocked. Two main reasons, I think. One of the biggest reasons is,
the facts of the case. Is that going to be your first main reason? The facts of the case that made it absolutely clear this was a self-defense shooting?
Looked at my case specifically, and I don't think it comes in any differently. A lot of times in a retrial, you have things that didn't come in cleanly. You have things that may have not been gone the way you hoped. This came in as clean as I could have expected. I thought we presented a good case. I presented everything I wanted. All the facts were out there that I had, and it's not like I can change anything. There's no different things that I'm going to be able to change in presenting this case a second time. Something that I missed, something along those lines, and that very often goes into these decisions that, well, we could have done this differently. No case is absolutely perfect, but there are minor things that may have happened, but there's nothing earth-shattering that's going to change
how I
present this case or what the facts are that come into the case. The second thing is that like I said before, I think the jury selection is the biggest thing. I think I said before, and I'll say it again, I think we had a really good jury. These were very conscientious jurors. They were put in a unique situation. We've never had a situation where we've spent a week, almost 5 days, picking a jury where they're sitting alone, for days on end before they even start hearing the case. With that being said, they paid attention. They asked good questions. They were engaged that entire time. So this was a really good jury from my perspective. And I can't always say that. The questions they asked were, for the most part, on point when they're going through that process, and they spent a long time in deliberations. So they took this case, gave it the seriousness that it should have gotten.
This is all bullshit because he can't say the truth of it, which is that it was the best jury politically, demographically he could have hoped to get. Like, it was a bunch of old men. It would have been a much worse story than a bunch of young women. The jury, they didn't mention this in the news story I just read, but they were very young jury, which means they're more likely to disrespect police. There were a lot of females, which meant they're going to be more likely to go for the emotional stuff and not the hard, technical, complicated taser sciencey stuff. So yeah, I mean, he might have hoped for, drawing, as that one article mentioned about the juror, with the comment from the juror, to get 12 black jurors maybe to convict him. Didn't seem very likely. So he can't say any of that stuff. So he's just going to go with this. They were very, very, very smart, attentive jurors. Sure.
I know some of the numbers have been out there. From my understanding, this did play a role in my decision making. It initially came out as 4-4-4, kind of a split. Not surprising, 4 for guilty, 4 for not guilty, and 4 kind of undecided. It did shift to 7-5. I think right about the time we got the first maybe we're hung kind of a response from the jury, and then it moved to 10-2 for not guilty. So that does play a role. And so with that being, I took a look at what is our history in our office.
And of course, this is according to whichever juror says this to him, but let's go. That's fine. Okay, sure.
In terms of doing a retrial, and quite frankly, we've had about 15 hung juries in the last 6 years, and we've only retried one in that 6-year period, and that was 11-1 for guilty. And looking at the facts of that case, it was a pretty overwhelming case, and so that's a case where you have a rogue juror.
Like you have one rogue juror in this case for the prosecution. That's what we had here.
This was not a case with a rogue juror. I think this case, they paid attention. They did a lot to try and arrive at a verdict, and they couldn't arrive at a verdict.
Because of one rogue juror.
So then it goes back to, okay, what I do differently? What can we do differently the next time we have this jury panel or to select a jury? I looked at what we did in the process. There were 43 strikes for cause. A lot of those were, they couldn't spend the time, they had conflicts, whatever it may be. But out of those, I recognized there were 15 that we said showed a bias to our case, at least in the process right there when we're questioning them. That didn't even reach. We had identified 30 before we even started selecting a jury of what I would term problematic jurors that I could say, geez, they're going to be a problem if we get them on the panel. They didn't make it into the jury box. So we then used, 10 of our 12 peremptory challenges. I talked about this earlier, where, we cleaned out people that after they came forward and for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons, some of which had ties with the law enforcement, that, we did everything we could.
Basically talking about how he did everything he possibly could to control the jury in his favor, including saying we didn't want any law enforcement, anyone anywhere near connected to law enforcement on the juries, what he just said, which if you've watched lots of cases, what often happens is someone comes into the jury box and they'll say, something like, well, I'm an attorney and I'm a defense attorney, and and they'll have reasons why you might want to dismiss the juror, but then the judge will just go, well, yeah, but you can be impartial, can't you? Oh, sure I can. Okay, well, that's good enough for me. That happens all the time. That happens all the time, because you can't just assume just because someone is connected to law enforcement that they can't possibly be fair. But you just said we did everything we could to screen the jury out, and even then it came back, according to him, 10-2.
Eliminate everybody that has ties to law enforcement, because I've heard that out there, is that, well, there's people on there that have ties to law enforcement. You're not going to eliminate everybody. That's not possible. So that's always going to be a factor. So what it boils down to is, I put the best case I could forward. When I tried this case, I did the best I could. I did everything I could. The jury couldn't reach a verdict. I still stand by the decision. I have, been involved in a number of officer-involved shooting cases or use of force cases. I've cleared most of them. This is one I thought should go to a jury, have a jury decide based on, there's a substantial question of the reasonableness of his actions based on the totality of circumstances. We argued that, and the jury, a very good jury, was not able to reach a verdict. So I just don't see how, when you do your best you can, it comes in as good as you can. Generally, it's going to go worse the second time around, and I just don't see us being able to reach a verdict. I think you'll have the same, even if maybe we get some people on our on our side more in terms of, I think we'll just have the same amount maybe hung on the other side. I just don't see a place where we get 12 people to agree. This is split the community. I've heard over the last 2 weeks people passionately on both sides calling me, emailing me, advocating for and against a retrial. So that didn't play a role. I got to make this decision on my own, and looking at that
bullshit. He has to say that, but let me just thank every one of you guys that responded to the call, answered the call, and contacted him and urged him not to retry the case, because he is a politician. And yes, they do count people on either side. He's pretending he's not, but he is. Prosecutors are, and they do care. And he would have been a lot more inclined to retry this case if all he heard was people from the BLM grifters saying, you need to retry this case, and having no pushback from the other side. So, maybe even if we hadn't gone out and said, please contact him and urge them not to retry this case, he might not have retried it anyway. But for all of your actions, for all of your prayers, for everything that you guys have done to help shine a spotlight on this case and get us to this final outcome, which I think, like I said earlier, I think is probably final, at least in the criminal side. Thank you guys for all that you have done. It really does mean a lot. And never mind this idiot, this liar saying that your phone calls and emails don't matter. Whenever a politician says anything, you got to ask them how it benefits them if they believe it. They all want you to believe your phone calls and emails don't matter because they don't want you making the phone calls and sending the emails. It's true in Congress, it's true in Lansing, and it's true for every little prosecutor too. So thank you to every single one of you that sent in those emails and made the calls.
Looking at everything I had, looking at the facts, quite frankly, I felt there was not a basis to be able to retry this case and have a verdict at the end. So I made the decision to not do that.
Can you talk about the message this sends to the community?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any message. I'm not big on messages sending to the community. I mean, I think we try and make our decisions based on the facts and analysis, and in every case.
The message is, I had no case, and the jury saw that.
I don't think this is, something that I'm trying to send a message by, charging him or not charging him. I made this decision based on the facts, based on the law, and what I thought I could prove. Like I said, I thought it went as good as it could have, but the jury, it's always a jury decision, and you never know what his jury's going to do. But based on what I had, we had a very good jury. I see coming to a different conclusion. So I don't know if there's a message there. It's, I think to some extent the system works. I think this is a split community on this issue. And
The message that sends to the community is, I wasted your tax dollars on the first trial, and I don't want to waste any more of them. I guess that's the message. I spent a ton of taxpayer money on a failed prosecution, and I'm cutting the losses now.
and but I still trust in the jury system, and sometimes this happens.
What does this mean? What does this mean for Schurr? Is he a free man now? What does this mean for him?
There's, we're not proceeding any further. He's been free. He's been out on bond all this time, so he's gonna, we're just not gonna proceed. The case
Thank
will
God.
essentially, be closed.
Did you consider reducing the charge and going for a conviction for voluntary manslaughter?
No, I thought about that, but I think that's kind of, that looks like I wasn't confident in my secondary. I think it was a secondary murder, and if the jury want to consider a lesser, I just didn't think.
You did that. You did that, you lying bag of trash. That was what you did when you added the manslaughter charge at the very end of the trial. You were hedging your bets. You thought maybe they won't convict on murder, but maybe they'll convict on manslaughter. You already did that. Why are you changing your mind now, you slime ball?
I think that was, we were accused during the trial of trying to switch around what we're doing, and if that's what I thought it was at the start. I'm not going to change it just to maybe, okay, let's try a different way to get a guilty verdict. At the beginning, I thought it was a second degree murder, and I'm going to try it on that or not try it at all.
You talk about, have you spoken to the Lyoya family?
I did. I spoke with Peter about a half hour, 45 minutes ago, and he's obviously very disappointed. This has been a very difficult case, and I apologize profusely. I'm very sorry I couldn't.
Yeah, they're very disappointed because they're less likely now to get money in the civil trial. That's all they care about.
Conclusion for them. He said I lost a child, and he did, and I feel for them, and I feel.
No, you didn't. He wasn't a child. He was a grown ass man. He was a grown ass, very drunk man with a long criminal history. He's not a child. Get over it.
Feel for any family that loses a child in a homicide. So he's clearly not happy. I tried to explain it the best I could, but I don't think there's anything I could say that was going to make this, that he's going to be happy about it. And I understand that.
Chris, at the end, you said it was 10 jurors for not guilty. I just wanted
Correct.
to clarify
It was
that.
10-2 was the final. That was my understanding of the final tally.
What have you been doing with this extra time? Why was this a decision you couldn't make on the day of? And, what was going through your mind and thinking, there's a chance to bring this back? You knew on the day of this was a good jury. You knew the case you had presented.
Because you wanted the BLM people to leave town. That's why.
You knew the facts pretty well. Have you been going back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, this is serious. This is a big decision. I mean, obviously, this is a big decision, and this isn't something you just rush into saying, "Oh, we got a hung jury, so I'm going to forget about it." I mean, I want to make sure like I said, that's why I went through this process. I've never gone back and watched portions of a trial before to try and say, okay, is there something I missed? Is there something I got to do differently? When you're in the heat of, a trial, you do miss things. And so did we screw up on the jury selection? Maybe, I thought it was a good jury. Did I miss something in that selection process? So, I knew the gravity of this decision. It has a big impact on the community, it has a big impact on, the Schurr family, has a big impact on the Lyoya family. So I didn't want to rush into it after, trials take a chunk out of you. It was a very, I spent a lot of time on this case. My office spent a lot of time on this case. Michigan State Police, they did a very nice job, and they spent a lot of time on this case. So it's not like I'm just going to, come up with a decision that at that moment I wanted to be thoughtful and consider everything I could. And that's why I took the time I did.
The jury foreperson, when they came in to announce they were hung, looked angry.
Mhm.
Did you get a chance to talk with
Yeah,
them?
I think I told you, we asked about that last time. She said she kind of slipped in the chair, and she wasn't angry, mad. She kind of fell into the chair. So that's the response I got at the time.
I don't know what that's about.
That's all I can tell you. That's she kind of addressed that. She didn't appear to be that
Did you
way.
know what the holdouts were holding out for?
Don't know. We didn't. It's not, and that's the thing. It's it's not like we talked to every single juror. There's only certain jurors that wanted to talk to us, so and we didn't. It's not like we tried to press them. I mean, so I wasn't involved in the deliberations at all. Blow by blow. So I don't. Didn't get that in depth.
So if Christopher Schurr wanted his job back at the GRPD, he's
Yeah, fat chance of that.
Violate training or policy.
That's
He's got nothing hanging over his head.
You'd have to ask the GRPD that. I don't know how they'd handle that. But obviously there's no criminal conviction. So yeah, and we're not seeking anything further.
Can you just,
Pretty sure that poor guy was supposed to pick up the pieces of his life.
Oh, geez. No, cost did not play a role whatsoever. I mean, that's, we spent a lot on experts in terms of what the sheriff spent on security. I don't know.
taxpayers' money. What do we
That's outside
care?
of my budget. I know part of our budget, we budgeted in for experts because we spent a substantial amount. I still haven't got the full, I think we're missing at least one of them, but we're probably $60,000-$70,000 just in experts.
The defense admin.
Those grifters, they're experts. The state called 3 experts. One was the taser guy who was great for the defense. Thank you. The other 2 were what was that grifter Steph Stoughton, who goes to all these trials to testify against police. Police can never do right to Steph Stoughton. He testified against Derek Chauvin. He testified against Kim Potter. Comes to this case, all he does is testify. The cops always do the wrong thing. His testimony is complete garbage. He and his partner were the only 2 state experts besides the taser guy, and their bills were 60 to 70 grand. What a grift! Congratulations, Grand Rapids. That's what your taxpayers paid for. A lying bag of trash to testify against your cops.
Mentioned that had this gone to another trial, they would have appealed or filed for the exclusion of certain evidence, particularly looking at like the police training. Did that play a decision at all, or did that play a role?
No, I mean, it's been like this for the last 3 years. I mean, we fought this all the way up to the, Supreme Court essentially. And so just the fact that they said, oh, we're going to fight some more. Yeah, that, you don't look at costs. You don't look at, what that is. It's can you bring it to a conclusion? You think there's a reasonable chance. And I just don't think there is.
By the way, speaking of that, every single court failed Christopher Schurr. The district court, the circuit court, the Court of Appeals, and the Michigan Supreme Court. Every single one of those courts failed Officer Schurr and failed the police in general. Every one of them. Every one of them did everything wrong. It's a shame. It's a disgrace.
The jury had been split 50-50. Would we have a different decision today?
I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. You don't know that because, it's not just looking at those numbers. It's looking at, they spent a lot of time, and that part of it. And when you look at if they come back in an hour and they say we're hung, and well, did they really spend a lot of time? So there's so many different factors. That's just one factor I definitely took a look at, but it's not just, okay, the jury came back, it's 11-1, we're going to automatically retry. You take a look at everything. So I can't just say that's a hypothetical, but I don't know.
You talk about what they were hung up on. I don't know if you've mentioned that.
I don't what they're hung up.
The facts of the case.
They talked what they were talking about. They're on the issues. I mean, they're on the issues, and training came up, and reasonableness of use of force. I mean, they were on point in terms of the things we argued. What hung them up and what they really got them. And once again, I'm only speaking for the ones that spoke to me. You could get a different perspective depending on a different juror, but they were, from what I got I spoke to more than one. They were definitely on the issues, the points, and they weren't off on some tangents. I've talked to juries where you're like, how did you come up with that? This was not that jury. So they were definitely on the things both sides were focusing on.
Did you get a sense from jurors, or do you imagine that there's a difference between jurors who reside in Grand Rapids versus the rest of the county?
Don't know. Yeah, I didn't get into that. I really don't know who, yeah, we have it when we go through the jury, but when we were talking with them, I don't know.
Can you talk about the racial issue here? Obviously, this became a racial issue. There were civil rights leaders here.
Sure.
There were marches and protests.
There were no civil rights leaders in Grand Rapids. There was race hucksters. There was grifters. That was all there were. Charlatans. People trying to stoke hatred. Hate peddlers. Hate merchants. There was no civil rights leaders in any way, shape, or form connected to this case at all. If anything, the civil rights leaders are the people defending the right to self-defense.
And now this decision, can you discuss that?
What would you like to discuss? It's been an issue in terms of the relations between the police and the minority community. That is an issue. I don't know what else.
It has nothing to do with the minority community. This was about a violently resisting felon who had assaulted a police officer and was fighting for control of his deadly weapon. Didn't matter if the guy was black or white at all in the slightest. Other than that, if he wasn't black, the race grifters wouldn't have been there. But the fact of the case would have been exactly the same.
Else we can say about that I think there's a lot of split along those lines when you look in the community and how people side on that. But that's, it's nothing new. That's always been out there for probably as long as I've been, a prosecutor. So it's, I'd like to see it healed. I'd like to see that come together. I hope that at some point in time we can. But I don't know if even if we get a conviction or not guilty, I don't think that changes the underlying issues. I don't think that somehow cures everything if we suddenly won this trial or flip, there's an acquittal. It's going to be out there, and it's something we're all going to deal with. And I think we're all trying, we being law enforcement, are trying to deal with that. I think Chief Winstrom's trying to deal with that. He's been trying to deal with that since this happened, and it's something I try and deal with as well in terms of my outreach. So it's something we always got to work on, and I hope we continue to do so.
Do you think they need more policy changes at GRPD, specifically the foot chase policy?
That's going to be up to GRPD. I have a number of policies. I don't, ask the chief on my policies, and that's something that's going to have to.
The GRP is going to change their chase policy to say never chase a suspect ever, or don't chase a suspect if he goes past the front bumper of your car. That'll be the new chase policy, courtesy of Seth Stoughton. Yeah, right.
Nope, never have, and it's going to have to. That's up to GRPD.
Do you have any input on their policies?
Nope, never have, and I don't have any input in my policies either. So, one more question.
Chris, legally, does this preclude, is this the end of the case, or can the state attorney general file charges on this, or even, of course, federal charges could still come too?
Technically, the attorney general could. She never has before, but technically, I think that there's always a possibility. But
From her office?
nope, not at all. All right, thank you.
All right. So that was the press conference with the prosecutor. Now we can watch the press conference for the defense. So let's see what they have. I think this one's shorter. Let's see. Here we go. Where they're sitting down now.
Sitting? Yeah. We'll move the Meyer water. Little product placement for Meyer.
This is Matt Borgula on the left and Mark Dodge on the right.
It would be nice if they sponsored.
In my opinion, they were both lousy throughout the trial. So we'll see if they're any better here.
There you go.
Obviously, they're already bad because they start off with this lame product placement for Meyer joke, rather than taking just as in the trial. They don't seem to take this all that seriously. But let's see how they do.
So,
this must be the same cameraman they had.
why don't we just do this? I don't have a statement prepared.
Of course you don't.
Start with my reaction to.
He doesn't have a statement prepared. Is anyone surprised? Is anyone surprised that the defense attorney does not have a statement prepared today? Didn't have hardly anything prepared for the trial either. But that's a one way to go through life, I suppose.
Becker's decision, and then you guys just fire away with any questions you have. Okay, so obviously we're very pleased with Christopher Becker's decision today. We appreciate all the time he took to deliberate over the next steps and whether or not to retry. We support his decision. We think it's the right one. And I know that our client, Christopher Schurr, is very pleased with it well. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Was Christopher Schurr watching this as it was being streamed? Was he watching Becker's press conference, and can you talk about his reaction?
We heard from the prosecutor this morning before the press conference. He let us know that he would have in the press conference right around the time the media learned as well. Prior to the press conference, he gave us his decision, so we weren't watching with the rest of it, but just moments before. So he knew before the press conference that what the decision was.
And what about his reaction? I mean, he's pleased, I know, but can you go into more detail?
You want to answer
his
that?
reaction?
Sure. Yeah, I've had the opportunity to talk to Chris Schurr this morning after the decision. And, obviously, a sense of relief, vindication following the trial and now this decision, but certainly not celebration. As far as for the last 3 years, it's never been anything to celebrate from Mr. Schurr, his family. So
this is like as bad as the trial. This is pathetic. Like, you would think, even without coming in with plans, although you had at least a couple hours to throw something together. We can't even begin to tell you how relieved our client is after being drugged through the mud for the past 3 years, after being threatened, after having the threat of a life imprisonment for a crime of which he was clearly not guilty, to finally be free of that, to have been vindicated by a jury, and now to have the finality of knowing that he won't be dragged through that nightmare again. I can't even begin to tell you the stress our client felt, the strain it put on his family. They could have, it would have been so easy to lay it on thick, to humanize their client like they failed to in the trial. And even now, they just still, they can't do it. It's so bad.
but there is a sense of relief here. Yes.
There's a sense
Well,
of
the
relief.
mayor put out a statement just a little while ago talked about sharing the deep sense of frustration and the belief that justice remains unfulfilled. David Grant put that out just a little while ago. Can you?
Okay, so this mentioned the mayor of Grand Rapids is David LeGrand, who said, "Oh, what did they say?" He said, "Let me play that back."
David Grant, sense of frustration and the belief that talked about sharing the deep sense of frustration and the belief that justice remains unfulfilled. David Grant put that out.
Okay, so a couple things about Dave LeGrand. First of all, so you guys know, Dave LeGrand is himself a lawyer. I actually kind of knew, well, I didn't know him well, but I met him once or twice. He was a state house member when I worked in the House. He was the type of Democrat who is extremely far left, but also extremely sly and friendly. And he would, like, he came into our office once and, "Hey, how you guys doing? Hey, I got a bill I think your boss will really like. It's kind of a bipartisan thing. It's just a nice bill that'll just bring some transparency to Lansing. Wouldn't that be great?" And it was a bill to, allow basically Dana Nessel to investigate and prosecute every Republican lawmaker, that transparency bill they were talking about. But, he's very clever. It reminds me of like Andy Shore, who went on, another former Democrat House member who became the mayor of Lansing also, and was famously a very friendly guy, very nice and friendly. And anyway, so all that to say, LeGrand knows what he's doing. He is a very smooth operator here, and this is the way the Democrats play these games. Because listen to what he just said. There's a sense. I feel the sense of frustration that people have, which is a nice way of, on one hand, being officially non-committal, but also clearly taking a side. Like it's a sharp way of playing it both ways. LeGrand is a very clever politician. He knows exactly what he's doing. These guys are morons. I bet you they're not going to say the smart thing. The smart thing to say in this situation is, shame on David LeGrand. How dare he? We've been frustrated for the past 3 years at this gross miscarriage of justice, dragging our client through this outrageous process. Well, let's see what justice was very clearly carried out. We had a very great, diligent jury that thought everything through carefully and overwhelmingly voted to acquit because of the overwhelming weight of the facts in this case. Justice was absolutely carried out. And the only thing that we should be frustrated about is that these scumbag people in the media, like yourself, have been lying about this case, lying about our client to the media for the past 3 years. And when the case actually came before a jury, they got to see the actual facts. So you can tell Dave LeGrand, shame on him and shame on everybody who peddles these lies, including you slimy scumbag reporter. That should be this guy's answer. Let's see what he says.
Just a little while ago. Can you respond to that?
Can you read me a statement?
This news is undoubtedly a source of immense pain and disappointment, and our community shares in their sorrow. Many in Grand Rapids.
Shame on him. How dare he speak for the community, and only for the half of the community that wants to lynch this guy? I mean, I would just be furious. I would be ready to stick it to these people.
Frustration and the belief that justice remains unfulfilled. These feelings are valid and must be acknowledged. That's the mayor's statement.
Certainly, we don't dispute that people's feelings should be acknowledged.
You see what I mean? I'm going to just turn my hair out at this. What hair I have left, I'm tearing out right now. Oh, yeah, we see what he says. We see what he means. Yeah, he's got a good point there. He's a dirty scumbag liar. The only words out of your mouth right now should be shame on him. But let's let them continue their placation of these evil people.
And I, in that context, entire statement, I understand the mayor's position. And it's his job to run the city and for all the constituents. So he wanted closure as well.
All the constituents.
And so
he just claimed all the constituents were on the prosecution side. Good God. And it's if it wasn't already clear, Christopher Schurr won his case despite these clowns, not because of them.
So I don't refute what he's saying. The process played out. I appreciate Mayor LeGrand's decision not to become involved in making comments during the trial, unlike some other elected officials.
Who? I want to know. Name him.
It's his job, because he's the mayor, to look at some of the larger issues that weren't part of this trial. The issues of the way we police in Grand Rapids and in Michigan. That's a legislative issue, an issue for the politicians. So I'm glad that he's involved in those issues.
that's a great opportunity to point out that there's legislation to protect my client from these malicious prosecutors and from these grifters who are now suing him civilly. But no, they probably don't even know this bill exists.
But the trial was actually
2404.
about Christopher Schurr and conduct that occurred on April 4th, and the jury overwhelmingly voted in favor of acquittal. So that's why I think the prosecutor got this right here, that a retrial wouldn't be good for anybody because at best would end up in another hung jury.
Were you surprised by his decision?
You mean, you hear what you just said there? At best? Don't you mean at worst? For your client, wouldn't a hung jury as opposed to acquittal be the worst of the situations? At best? This guy's got a...
Decision today?
No,
Hold on, what's that last question?
Were you surprised by his decision today?
no.
You obviously know this has been a divisive issue. What would you say to people out there right now who might be seeing this who are upset with the decision?
Shame on you. That's what you say to them. Would you say to them, you probably didn't watch this trial because almost nobody did. If you did watch the trial, you would know why the jury overwhelmingly voted for our client's innocence, because he was innocent, because it was a lawful case of self-defense. So maybe instead of popping off and whining and complaining, you should learn a thing or two. You should have watched the trial, learn the law of self-defense, know the facts of the case. And if you at that point still defend this guy who was out at 8 o'clock in the morning at blackout drunk levels, driving a car down the street on a stolen license plate to pick up a child and endanger the child to go to school, according to his friend's testimony, and then he gets pulled over, fight with the cop, fight for control of the taser, take control of the taser. What do we say to the people in the community who are upset right now? Don't resist arrest. Don't fight the police. Don't try to take the cops' tasers. Don't try to disarm the cops. Maybe you'll be okay.
So we acknowledge that there are greater issues at stake, and that I think that if anybody's upset with this decision, they should refocus their anger or their frustration on maybe trying to make change in a way that they think a change should be made. No one has ever said that we can't adapt the way we police in the state of Michigan.
There's nothing to adapt to.
Community standards that change over time.
Your client was 100% in the right,
This issue
wasn't he?
was about whether or not someone was reasonably in fear and was able to use, allowed to use deadly force in a situation that he didn't want to be in. And so when the jury saw that and heard the actual evidence relating to this case, I think the answer was clear for the vast majority of the jurors.
Now that this chapter is over, what's next for your client?
I don't think you've talked to this one, Shane.
Undecided at this moment. Obviously, it's been a difficult few years here with life on hold in many regards. So it's still going to take some reflection with Mr. Schurr and his family and what might be coming next.
Well, and
What an amazing answer.
training officers all said
What an amazing answer. Well, he's trying to put his life back together, and he's been through this absolute nightmare that he should have never been subjected to. And it's absolutely worn on him for the past 3 years. Now he has this huge weight lifted off of him. But at the end of the day, first of all, he still faces a meritless civil trial. And secondly, even still, he has to be hated because of you monsters in the mass media that have turned his community against him. Shame on all of you people. I hope you all burn in hell.
he didn't violate training or policy, and he's no longer has these charges hanging over his head. I mean, Grand Rapids Police Department, I mean, what's to keep him from that?
Well, there was never any decision made by anybody in the internal affairs or whoever reviewed what happened here that Christopher Schurr violated any policy. And so the only reason he was fired in the first place is because of this rule that if you're charged with a felony, you're fired. And so hopefully the city will look at this and determine that you have an officer who complied with his training and now has gone through a trial where it was a hung trial, but it was, as the prosecutor concedes, vastly in favor of acquittal. And, you know,
the better answer would have been, are you kidding? Grand Rapids doesn't deserve Officer Schurr. Grand Rapids deserves violent criminals. That's what the prosecutor has brought to this city. That'd be the answer I'd give. By the way, this guy's suit coat looks ridiculous.
reassess whether or not Christopher Schurr should be able to work for GRBD. But again, as Mr. Becker said, that's a decision for the city of Grand Rapids, not for his defense team.
Would he even want to after all of this?
I think we would have to talk to Chris about that. Certainly for today, he's just happy that Mr. Becker decided not to proceed with another trial.
You talked about the piece of evidence that Lyoya had possession of the taser. Chris Becker put on his witnesses saying they didn't believe that Patrik Lyoya ever had full possession of the taser. There was struggle over the taser. You guys showed your video showing that Patrik Lyoya had his hand on the taser, had sole possession of the taser. How much does it hurt your client's life to have that belief out there in the community and the prosecutor's belief that Patrik Lyoya really never had the taser in his sole possession?
Enough to bring a civil lawsuit possibly for defamation, because you keep repeating this lie, you people in the media. Hey, what's your name? Maybe you'll be the person he sues first over this. I mean, that's what I would say. Maybe something like that. This outrageous lie that was, I mean, this is what they do. This is why, you saw this with the George Zimmerman case, where they would just, and hands up, don't shoot. They lie about the facts of the case constantly. Officer Schurr was towering over poor innocent Patrik Lyoya when he shot him in the back of the head. Not that Patrik Lyoya had full control of the officer's taser at that point and posed an immediate deadly force threat in that very moment. And that's what all the video proved time and time and time again at the trial. Why? Why is the media allowed to get away with this lie? Let's see if this attorney can, for once, correct the record.
I don't know that any witness actually testified to that on behalf of the prosecution or the.
No, none of them did.
Certainly not the defense. I think the testimony from the prosecutors or but any witness actually testified.
I like how he says this. I don't know if any witness actually testified for that for the prosecution. The only witness the prosecution had was the neighbor who said he didn't see anything. So how does this guy not know? How is he not prepared to come out and say, that's a ridiculous lie that was proven in trial to be a complete and total lie. It was a hoax invented by the mass media by you fuckers.
Testified to that on behalf of the prosecution or the, certainly not the defense. I think the testimony from the prosecutor's experts that watched the video is that they didn't know whether or not he was holding it like a gun. So everybody agreed, including from the start of this case to the end. If you go to Judge Ayub's decision in the district court, he said he had exclusive control of the taser. If you go to the Michigan Court of Appeals, they said he had exclusive control of the taser. The prosecutor himself has never disputed that Mr. Lyoya had exclusive control of the taser. And we know that
part of the
because you see it in his left hand when they're fighting over it, and then it's only in Mr. Lyoya's right hand, just prior to the time the shot was fired. So I do agree or understand what you're asking, and it has been extremely harmful.
He almost got himself saying, I agree with what you're asking. He almost said that. He almost said, I agree with what I agree with what you've been saying. And then he caught himself. And so I see why people would say that. I mean, here's the time to say, stop lying about this case.
That there's been misinformation in the public about what actually occurred. And especially when you have city officials who are spreading misinformation about what actually happened. The narrative of this story had to be overcome at trial because you had certain officials saying that the basis of the stop, Mr. Lyoya had just was checking his car and something had happened. He was on his way to work, and then he was executed while he lay prone on the ground, as the evidence conclusively showed at trial. And the prosecutor didn't even refute. That wasn't the case. This was a struggle where the officer had to make a split-second decision. So we had to overcome that in the courtroom because prior to the trial, you had plaintiff's attorneys and elected officials saying facts that weren't true. And so that made it very difficult.
Okay, I'm glad he's at least bringing this point out, although it's the way he says things. Facts that aren't true. You mean lies? Don't just call them facts. Don't say facts. They're not facts. Statements that are untrue at least, but lies. Lies. Betty Nelson says he should never have been charged They owe this man. He needs to sue. They destroyed his life. The guy was a piece of garbage, meaning Lyoya was a piece of garbage, period. Unfortunately, Betty, here's the thing. Defamation is, okay, so the couple of things. First is wrongful prosecution. That's virtually impossible to go after because prosecutorial discretion is extremely broad. And worse than that, they already basically did file suit when they appealed the decision to bring the charge. And the corrupt Court of Appeals, the corrupt Michigan Supreme Court both said, no, go ahead, it's fine. You can bring the case to trial. So to bring a wrongful prosecution claim, you'd have to say that why the Court of Appeals was wrong, which no lower court would, and the Court of Appeals itself won't. And the Michigan Supreme Court was wrong, which of course they won't say they were. So there's absolutely no way you could do that. Theoretically, you could maybe bring defamation claims against certain people that were spreading these lies about the case. But that too is extremely difficult because you have to prove, well, first of all, even though he's not really a public figure, the courts have more or less abused this public figure classification to bring in anyone that's talked about in public, which makes defamation very hard. You have to show damages, you have to show actual malice, you have to show falsity, and there's all kinds of ways to get out of that. For example, if you sue any particular individual saying that they were lying about the case, they can just say, well, I heard this from somebody else. And there's one of the defenses to defamation is to say that that your character was already so low in the public's mind that there's no way it could go lower, which basically comes down to because everybody else has already been calling you names in the first place. So defamation lawsuits they're extremely uncertain. They're extremely expensive. They're extremely time consuming. They take forever. And you might, at the end of the day, have nothing but a massive pile of legal fees. So at the end of the day, it would probably be even more risky and even more harmful for him to try to sue somebody over even defamation, let alone wrongful prosecution. It's a terrible thing. And the reality is life's just not fair. And the only way that Christopher can be made whole at all is from the sympathy of his supporters. And that's pretty much it. And the hope that the public learns their lesson from all of this, which they clearly have not. And there'll be another case somewhere else against cops again. And that's just the way that goes. Betty asks, well, my understanding is that he tried the case as a Republican because he didn't want Nessel going after Schurr. That's not my understanding of what happened. Quite the contrary. My understanding was that Nessel did not want to bring the charges, and this local prosecutor did, perhaps because Grand Rapids has been trending towards Democrats, and this was his ticket to re-election, perhaps. But who knows? I mean, he got reelected in 2024, I believe. Maybe it was 2022. I think it was 2024, though. So who knows? That might have something to do with this. But either way, it's not as if Nessel can't go after him now, but I don't think she will. And we just heard from the prosecutor a moment ago who didn't think that's going to happen either. Betty asked, is there any rioting? I don't know. I would assume no. I think that's part of the reason why the prosecutor waited 2 weeks to make the announcement there won't be a retrial. So all the BLM activists can go home. But we'll see. I don't know. Well, I'm sure there'll be news coverage if there is any, but I don't think there is.
For Christopher Schurr to get a fair trial. So it has harmed him. And we certainly hope now that there's been a public proceeding where all the actual facts have come out, that it's reported accurately in the press, and that people can see, if they didn't watch the trial themselves, what actually happened.
Were you surprised they were able to get around that video? I mean, the video is hard to watch. It's, the gun to the back of the head.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Certainly nobody, I don't know who can look at that video and say it's not upsetting. Everybody that sees that, you're not a human being if you're not upset by watching that video. And so, yes, it's hard to get around that. The fact that Mr. Lyoya was regrettably shot in the back of the head, as the evidence showed, it doesn't matter where the shot was made. Even the prosecution agrees with that. It's the decision to use deadly force. And then once an officer decides to use deadly force, the location of the shot is not what the jury was looking at. And I applaud the jury for recognizing that. I didn't see or talk to a single juror afterwards that suggested that that was a sticking point or something they had to get over. And so while, there are still photos out there that look really bad, that wasn't the issue for the jury. And thankfully, they didn't focus on something that wasn't relevant.
But that had
So real quick, there's a news article about this. There was a demonstration. They call it a protest. And by the way, and Betty says, well, 10 not guilty to 2 guilty speaks volumes. And by the way, there's dispute about this. The prosecutor claims 10-2. Defense is 11-1. At first, earlier I said, big difference, but actually kind of is 2 versus 1 for guilty is double. So maybe that's why maybe the prosecutor was the one who was trying to exaggerate a little bit. I don't know, but anyway, so here's the story. There was a demonstration at the courthouse. And it says here about 75 people showed up. And so there's a photo or two. There you go. Again, these people are an embarrassment to Grand Rapids. What does this say? We don't need no slave catchers anymore. These people are deranged. This is, I guess, there's a story about. There's also recently been someone named Riley Doggett, who I guess was killed in a police chase. Oh, well, maybe you shouldn't get into a police chase. And of course, the way they, as always, the media just continues to spin the case in ways that don't actually matter. It was a Congolese refugee. There should be a federal law that your refugee status is revoked for, being a criminal. Shouldn't there be? Seems to me if we give you the hospitality of letting you come to our country, you should at least obey the law. Anyway, so yeah, Lyoya was face down on the ground trying to get up with Schurr on his back when he was shot in the back of his head. Who's this person, this liar? Kayla Tucker. That's who Officer Schurr should sue for defamation if you can find a pro bono attorney. Maybe there's some lawyer out there though, just for the passion, because it's going to, like I said, defamation lawsuits get expensive very quickly because of discovery and so forth. But maybe that should be the reporter that he sues. Of course, there's many. I remember seeing these same articles, these same lies right after the incident occurred, even though the video was out even then. This is a case where all the facts were in on day one. All right, let's finish off this video and call it a stream here.
it'd be a huge mountain for you guys to climb. That video that's out there, right? Were you surprised you could overcome that?
Well, that was our job,
For instance,
Ken. So, we're dealt the facts that were given, and we argued to the jury based on the law. And
this is a stupid answer. Again, this guy just cannot come up with any way of framing the issue in the way that his client's in the right. He almost makes it sound like he got his client off through some kind of magical lawyer wizardry. Yeah, well, sure, the video proved my client was guilty, but we just looked at it on the basis of the law. As a technicality, he got off on a technicality. No. You say, the video proved my client was completely innocent. Only you demented, lying bags of garbage have been telling the public the video showed the opposite of what it actually did.
The fact is, Officer Schurr made a decision in a split second, and the shot ended up in a place where
I hate this guy.
regrettably ended his life. But he wasn't picking where the shot was going. So it was his decision to use deadly force, and the jury just considered that.
I know you're criminal attorneys. Do you believe Schurr has a civil case against the city for how this has been handled?
You're right, we're criminal attorneys. I don't know. That's going to be left to other attorneys that do that.
It's
type
outside
of
our
work.
very, very, very small
He
range
has
of
a question.
competency, so we can't give you an answer.
I mean, he has civil attorneys, so I assume you speak with.
He's had civil attorneys. Right now, there's a lawsuit pending
Right.
against him.
Right.
Now, whether he's got claims, that remains to be seen, and we'll let somebody else answer those questions.
So what should this mean to the civil lawsuit against Christopher Schurr?
Again,
I think
I'm not
They
sure.
were counting on, a guilty verdict to help bolster their civil
Yeah,
case.
yeah, that's why they're so mad.
I don't know that, it's a different standard. I used to do some civil work, so I don't know that the plaintiff attorneys, this case is done because of this decision. But again, you're gonna have to ask.
He just can't stop advocating for the opponents. He just can't stop. He cannot stop himself. Yeah. The fact that my client is completely not guilty absolutely blows their civil case out of the water because the jury basically said it was self-defense. He was doing the right thing, protecting his own life. Absolutely. Their civil case is as garbage as the criminal case. That's what a smart, competent attorney defending his client would actually say. Oh, I hate this guy.
Johnson or Joe Seward, who's the attorney for Christopher Schurr in the civil case. The case is still pending in federal court, and so that's going to play out just the same way this case played out in the circuit court here.
Has Chris ever spoken to Patrik Lyoya's family? Does he wish to? You said that this was very difficult for him. There's two parties here.
Not that I know of. I don't think they've ever spoke before. If you knew Chris, he would not be opposed to it. Yeah, it's one of the other unfortunate aspects of this whole case is nobody really gets to know Chris Schurr and the type of person that he really is. But yeah, Chris would not be opposed.
Why would he speak to them? They're suing him. Why don't you say that, you retard? Yeah, the people that are currently trying to shake him down for what's left of his life. You want him to call his assailant's family for what? To ask them to drop their ridiculous case against him, perhaps? What an outrageous question. How dare you ask that question?
Do it, and I think overall, just the tone and the temperament amongst the families outside the courtroom for any folks that were there was about as cordial as can be under the circumstances. But now it's my understanding they have not spoken thus far.
What do you guys say to the Lyoya family after this?
Well, I mean,
go back to Congo. Shame on you.
Nobody ever wants to see someone lose a child, and so it's certainly
he wasn't a child.
Something that it was a tragedy, and I know
your son was a threat to the community, and he shouldn't have been in our country. He had no business being instead of being a grateful refugee and trying to improve the community of the country that took him in. He was a constant threat to every single resident of Grand Rapids. He was behind the wheel of a car with a 0.3 blood alcohol level, quadruple the legal limit at 8 o'clock in the morning. He was a threat the moment that Officer Schurr found him that morning driving a vehicle with stolen license plates. After which he assaulted the officer, and then at the end of and then threatened his life, fought with the officer, seized control of his taser. Every single thing that your son did endangered the life of the officer. He is the victim. Your son was the assailant. And he is the one who should be, well, he's dead, but he got what he earned. Yeah, Betty, exactly right. The guy was a criminal through and through. That's what you should say. I'm sorry that you were incompetent parents and you raised a son who was an absolute dirtbag. And now that you're trying to grift off of his death, shame on you. Get out of our country. That's what you should say to them.
Our client shares this feeling that this was a tragic situation that nobody wanted on that day. He didn't wake up that morning looking to go out and have this happen. And so,
he wasn't looking for anything. He was blacked out drunk. He didn't know what he was doing.
It's a tragic situation that regrettably ended up in his death. And there's not really nothing more we can say about that.
We done? I think we're done.
Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank God. Thank God that we never have to listen to that attorney again. I hope. I hope. I can't imagine why else we would. But I think we are finally done with Matt Borgula and Mark Dodge. And she wasn't here today, but she was also lousy Michaela Hamilton, who have proven throughout this entire process to have been lousy lawyers. And yet the facts were so absolutely overwhelming for Christopher Schurr that he was not found not guilty, but by a 11-1 mistrial, overwhelmingly the jury believed he was not guilty. And it sounds like he is not going to be retried at all. The Grand Rapids prosecutor has said so. I don't see Dana Nessel bringing charges. I don't see any federal charges. So there's going to be the civil issue, but even in the worst case, he'll still be free. He'll still be free to pick up the pieces of his life. And unfortunately, that is not justice. That is not justice, because Officer Schurr is not going to be made whole by the system that deprived him of 3 years of his life and more, because he's got a lot. I mean, frankly, he still has more to get through. And he will always be someone that is going to be, seen by these disgusting race grifters as an evil person who might be hounded for the rest of his life for all we know, like Kyle Rittenhouse probably is. ZFS says he was a thug, not a child. He's a grown-ass adult who chose to attack an officer. Exactly right. Now, maybe he was too drunk to even know what he was doing, but that's still recklessness for you. So he got what he got. And yeah, it's too bad he's dead. Maybe. Or maybe if he hadn't been pulled over by Christopher Schurr, he would have killed that child that he was going to pick up in his car that morning. You never know whose life might have been saved by Christopher Schurr having to take the life of Patrik Lyoya to save his own. Maybe his. Who knows? Anyway, once again, the prosecutor did mention it. The volume of calls and emails he was getting from both sides, he says, if your guys' phone calls and emails had any impact at all in this decision, I do believe it does. Regardless of what the prosecutor says, now it's possible he may have just not brought the charges again anyhow. But as I said, prosecutors are politicians. They do respond to pressure. They do care about electoral outcomes. That's probably why he brought the charges in the first place. So for every little thing that all of you have done for Officer Schurr, whether it was supporting him financially, or whether it was drawing attention to his case, or whether it was calling or emailing the prosecutor, as we asked you to do last week, thank you all for everything you've done for Christopher Schurr. And I know that not just him, certainly Christopher Schurr most of all, but all of law enforcement are breathing a sigh of relief that this case is over. It's not the end for them, of course, because it never is, because BLM and these evil, racist hucksters are going to find the next case to stir up hatred against police officers, because that's what they do for money. It's disgusting, and shame on every last one of them. But now I think I'm not going to do it on camera. I'm going to have to retire my Stand with Schurr poster in the backdrop. Maybe I'll put it up to the side or something. It's I want it to be as prominent as possible as we're covering this case, but it is actually covering up my logo. So I'll probably have to move it someplace. But anyway, thank you to everybody who has brought attention to this case. Every little bit makes a difference. You might have heard the prosecutor said it in the beginning of the jury deliberations, it was 4-4-4. 4 not guilty, 4 guilty, 4 undecided. Assuming that's true, which it may have been, jurors are not supposed to hear any public discussion about cases, but maybe some of them did. And to the extent that people did something on this case, thank you all very much. And by the way, I do got to say one thing. Now that this case is over, one man, Senator Jim Runstead, told a bunch of us at a state chairman candidates forum that he was going to, in his capacity as state chairman, stand up for Christopher Schurr And to my knowledge, he never did. So maybe he can, if he wants to tell me or show me some other way that he did, well, then I'll stand corrected. But as far as I know, he didn't come through. And I'm sorry to see that. But I'm going to say that because he gave us his word. So that's all there is to that. Anyway, maybe tomorrow we'll do the coverage of the Trump and geopolitics stuff. And then Sunday night, we're going to have a stream just on Michigan stuff. Michigan legislature's been doing things, state politics, all that good stuff. So we'll be back to our regular program on Sunday. Now, I always forget to say this, but this time I'm not going to say this. If you like this content, please do hit that like button, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook or Rumble or X, wherever you're watching it, because it does help the channel grow. So thank you guys all for tuning in. And until next time, as always, thanks for all you do for liberty. Peace.